Good morning, Stampers. Welcome to Connect to Create. I'm Pat Verlis with Verlis Stamp and Flair, and I'm so glad you're here. If this is your first time joining Connect to Create, maybe it's the first time you stumbled upon us on YouTube, then we're so glad you're here. But let me tell you a little bit about what Connect to Create is. It is a collaboration between a great friend of mine, Kathy Ondas from Simply Cards by Kathy. She's also a fellow Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and myself. And each week we take turns and bring you either a technique or some tips or tricks. We don't necessarily make a complete card for you, but we will show you cards at the end of the videos or maybe during and throughout that demonstrate how we use those techniques. So before I get started today, I want to give a special thanks to all of those who have subscribed to my channel recently. It's been great, and I'm starting to get more comments, and it's so fun to read your comments. Particularly the technique that Kathy did, I think a couple weeks ago, where it was called partial embossing. Her cards were gorgeous, as they always are, but I've gotten so many positive comments back on those cards, and I appreciate those, and Kathy appreciates those. So we make sure each other knows about the comments on each other's channels. So it's great. So thank you so much for those. Your feedback means a lot to us. So it keeps us going and keeps us excited and energized. And we're glad we can do this for you. So today I am doing something a little bit different. I hesitate to call it a technique. It's really more some tips and some tricks to make your stamping life maybe a little bit easier and just add a little pizzazz or wow to your cards, but very simply in a way that's easy to do. It'll probably be a very short video because none of these tips take very long, but I'm going to share 3 of them with you. And the first one I'm going to share is, I call it speckles. And I'll show you how to make speckles with your Stampin' Right markers. Maybe you know how to do that, but I certainly wish somebody had shown me a long time ago how to do it, because you don't always have a speckle stamp handy. So I'm going to show you how to make speckles easily. And I'm going to show you how to make some what I call faux bows, 2 different faux bows. One I call a slatted faux bow, and the other I just call a faux bow. I am not a bow expert. So I've come up with a couple ways to simplify my bow making, because whenever I make a bow, they turn out crooked, they face the wrong way or something. So these are very simple and easy to do, and I hope you'll like them. And then the third thing I'm going to talk to you or show you is a technique, I guess. It's called rock and roll. And it's an oldie. It's been around forever. It's probably one of the first ones I've learned. But in talking with Kathy, she's not familiar with it. So I'm going to show that, and it's super fun, super easy. So let's flip my camera down and go ahead and get started. All right, so the first one I called speckles, and all you need is a Stampin' Right marker. You can use any color you want. This one is basic black. These are for sale singly, so I'll show you that one. But you can certainly use other colors, and I grabbed a couple other colors just to show you. What I did find is you do want this to be relatively, I'll say new, but certainly not dried out, because if it's dried out, it doesn't work very good. But I have seen people with cards that had these speckles on them, and it kind of gives it a nice grungy look. And I never could figure out how to do it. And I'd heard they do it with their Stampin' Right marker. And now I played and nothing, I'm tapping it like this and I'm getting no speckles. So I didn't know what they did. Well, I finally saw somebody demonstrate it. In case you haven't seen it, all you do is you take the brush end of your Stampin' Right marker, you stick it a little bit into the cap, not a lot, just the tip, hold this firmly, and you're just gonna flick it down. Now, there you can see them. I'll pick this up, right? You don't have very good control about where these go. So do protect your work surface. Don't flick it towards you because then the speckles are going to come at you. That's my tip. Don't flick it towards you. So I added some black ones on here. You can turn your paper. I grabbed my melon mambo, and you can see maybe the melon mambo now, right? The farther you, and I grabbed a shaded spruce one just for grins. And I would probably never do this on a card and put 3 colors, but you certainly can. The green one, I might flick some if I were making a scene and I had some grass and I wanted it to have a little variation, then flick some speckles on it. So that's the first tip that I just wanted to show you how to do that with your markers. And surprisingly, I was a little concerned at first that it might cause some damage to the brush tip, and it's been fine. I have had no issues. All right. So the second thing I'm going to show you are the 2 faux bows. I'm going to do one that I called a slotted faux bow. So I just took a scrap of, I've got very vanilla cardstock, and you need to put a couple of slots or holes in this. And wherever you put it, that's where your bow is going to end up. And this is what I love about it. You can control exactly where your bow is as opposed to being tipped the wrong way. So you need something to put either slots or holes. I have an old, and you can see it's old style stamp. That was a 2-slot stamp. You might still have one around too if you've been stamping for a long time. If you don't have one of these, don't worry about it. You can use a single slotted stamp and or punch and just do it twice. Or you can use a circle punch. You probably want one, I would say at least 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch. It's going to depend on your ribbon width. But I'm going to go ahead and I am just going to punch 2 slots in here. Now, you want these, if you have slots, some of our dies also include a slot in them, especially if you've got any tag punches. Often the tag ones will have a little tiny die that makes a slot, so those would work well. You want the slots to be about the width of your ribbon. It can be slightly smaller. You wouldn't want it to be a lot bigger, but you wouldn't want it to be too much smaller either. And I'm going to use this ribbon. This is our ribbon in one of the new ink colors. It's called Copper Clay. I'm debating with myself what's my favorite new ink color, and it's either this Copper Clay, which is really a rich coppery color, I love it, or Pebbled Path. I can't decide. But I'm going to use this. I thought this would show up good on the very vanilla so you could see it. And you don't need a lot. You probably only need about 4 or 5 inches. I'll just make it easy on myself, and that's probably closer to 6. It does help a little bit if these are at an angle, just because you're going to slide them through those slots. Now, this you can see is definitely probably about twice as wide as the slot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back in here again, and I'm just going to go in and just snip out a little bit more to make the slot a little bit bigger. And don't worry if they look a little jagged or icky. They're going to get covered up. So now you're going to put your ribbon in the slot. I usually just put it through like this. You want it to look like that. That's going to be the center of your bow. And now you're going to flip it over, and on the back side, hold one of them over out of your way and take the other one and slide it down through the slot. This is where it helps to have the angle in the end because it just slides through a little bit better. And then you're going to take the other one and slide it down through on the other slot. And just wiggle it around a little bit to kind of pull it through, flatten it out. Don't pull too hard. If you do use separate, like circle punch or or dies to make your slats, you probably want about 1/4 of an inch gap between them, because that's going to determine how big your center of your bow is. Now you can play with this if you want, but usually I just lay it. And the nice thing about this is it lays nice and flat. Okay. And then you'll come back in and just trim your ends. So if you're going to mail this, and this will also vary depending on the kind of ribbon you use, how well this is going to bunch on the back. This one's a little bit heavier. If you use a finer ribbon, it'll lay even flatter. So there is my first faux bow. See that? Isn't that easy? And it's so nice because it is very flat for mailing, which is great. And you can control exactly where it's going to be. Okay, so that's, I call the slotted faux bow. The other faux bow isn't really a bow at all. It's just kind of loops of ribbon. And for this one, you want a ribbon that is reasonably soft, not too wide. I'm going to use this new ribbon that we have in the current catalog. It's called the Sheer Ribbon Combo, and it comes in Azure Afternoon color, which is this pretty blue, Lemon Lolly, and Bubble Bath. And this is gorgeous ribbon. I didn't realize it. I kind of overlooked it at first. I was interested because it was the new colors. But if I bring this up close, can you see this little edging or stitching along each side? It's silver. So it's very elegant, and it's satiny, but not too stiff. So it works well for this. I'm going to go ahead and use the Azure Afternoon because I think the darker color, maybe you can see it a little bit better against my white background. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to loop it back and forth. I usually do it about 3 times, so I have 3 on each side. Okay, and you can make it as big as you want it, and then just trim it off. Now, the next thing is you need a piece of some kind of cording. You could use linen thread, baker's twine. I like to use the cording from Simply Elegant Trim. Just with this ribbon, it's already got some silver in it, so I just grabbed the silver. And we're just going to tie this around here. Now, it can be helpful to use, like if you have tweezers to hold that. That can be helpful. So it kind of stays and you don't have to hold it while you're tying. And I usually, I'm going to show you one way how I do it, but I will show you the other way, obviously, too. I just tie this in a knot. This is where I should have left put this back on here. Okay, so you're going to squeeze it tight. And you want to tie a second knot so it stays. Some days I'm off thumbs, and today's one of them. See why I have trouble making bows? I have hard enough time tying knots, let alone make pretty bows. So it doesn't help that I can't hold it in my lap. I'll blame it on that. Okay. Get out there. Okay, I do not want that in there. If you're a good bow maker, you'd probably already have a regular kind of bow made by now, but not me, because I'd be fussing forever. Okay. So there you go. And you can now either call this good. I like to fluff them apart a little bit sometimes. Move them in opposite directions, fluff them up. You can either now just trim this close and trim it off. What I like to do is now I'm going to pretend I'm tying my shoes. And I don't really care on my shoes where the bows go. See, that's how mine usually, you want them to go this way and they go that way. But, so just tie that tight. Leave it kind of messy purposely. I like to leave it big. You could make it small. You could make it bigger than your faux bow or whatever you like. You do want to pull it tight. And then I just trim it off. And that is my faux bow. Now I take this with a glue dot and just stick it down on my card. They look fancy when you get them on the card because they've got lots of loops. It looks like a triple bow, but it's not really. It's just 3 loops tied in the center. Now you could certainly do 2 loops. If you had heavy, thick ribbon, you might just want to do even just 1. It works best with thinner, narrower ribbon than it does with thick ribbon. I loved our crinkled seam binding that we had, the white crinkled seam binding that we could color in any color. It worked really well with that because the crinkles really just made this thing kind of puff up. So, okay, so that's my second bow. And our next thing I'm going to show you is rock and roll stamping. Now, you may have heard of this, or you may not have. My cardstock here. I just have some strips of cardstock. I'm going to start out and show you how I did it with the Cheerful Daisy stamp set. The Cheerful Daisy stamp set is new this year. Lots of fun. Very pretty daisies. Gorgeous dies come with it. And I have cards made with these, so you will get to see a finished project, I promise. But you can do this kind of one of 2 ways. With the Cheerful Daisies, they have an outline stamp. So let's just, and I should have brought my foam pad, but I think we'll be okay. I'm just going to show you 3. And now we're going to, so we created our background. And now we can do this one of 2 ways. We can stamp the center of the flower, which I have bubble bath. So I'm just going to stamp this one here. Now my camera, of course, is right in my way. And that's how we would normally stamp one of these daisies, right? We do our 2-step stamp and we would call it done. And it's a beautiful daisy. We'd probably stamp the center, but clean my stamp. If I want to add some color on the tips, I can take this stamp, and I have Berry Burst, and I can take, and this is what is the rock and roll technique. You're just going to take this stamp and you're going to lay it on its edge, the edge of the stamp, on the ink pad, and you're just going to rock it and roll it so that you just pick up ink on the stamps. Now, a hint, you want your acrylic block to be as small as possible and still fit on your stamp. You do not want to use a larger block than if you can possibly help it, because as you rock and roll, you will hit the block as opposed to the stamp. So just it's a good habit to always use the smallest possible block for the size of your stamp anyway. But it just matters a little bit more with this. So I'm going to lay, hopefully you can see, one of the edges in here, and I'm just going to roll it around. And you can see just the edges are inked. And now I'll put this back on here. See if I can get it lined up close. And now I have a flower with bubble bath in the center and berry burst on the edges. Isn't that pretty? This is such a simple, quick technique that just adds a little bit of wow. I'm going to show you one more way, and I'll grab my Calypso Coral here. I could have also stamped off first, so this wouldn't have been maybe as dark, which might have looked nice. But let me rock and roll with Calypso Coral. And now I didn't stamp it with another color. I'm just going to stamp it with the Calypso Coral and put that on there. And now I have a white daisy with the tips colored. And honestly, this might be one of my favorite ways to do it, is that way I can have a white daisy. With an outline, it's not as critical. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's do one more with Lemon Lolly. Here I'm going to stamp my center. And then I'm going to take my Calypso Coral. After I clean my stamp, always clean your stamp. And I'm going to ink this up. Another thing, if I try to show you this way, the flatter you can hold this, the more surface area, obviously, you're going to get colored. It doesn't need to be equal all the way around. And it's kind of nice if it's not equal, because I think it looks more natural with nature that way. But let me just pick up a little bit here. And this time I'm going to stamp off, so it's not quite so bright with my Lemon Lolly. Now, that's probably my favorite one. You see that? Just slight, and the stamping off makes it so that the edge or the line where the color starts and stops is not as distinct. It makes it kind of looks more natural, right? So that is rock and roll. That's all there is to it. I told you it was easy. So now let me show you my cards. I'm going to start with a card. I made it with Hello Ladybug, and I actually used this stamp from Hello Ladybug to make my flowers. And I have a punch that coordinates with that. It's like a medium daisy punch. I don't think it's available anymore, unless it might be an online exclusive. But these, I then punch these out. So these do not have an outline, because I simply took my piece of cardstock, and I guess I could show you this. It would probably take a quick minute. Let's do a bubble bath one. And we'll stamp this. Should clean it. Now let's pull in the berry burst. And we're going to rock and roll. If you don't get something on one tip, it's no big deal. You can always rock and roll again. If you get too much, just clean it. This time I'm going to stamp off. And now see if I can line it up. Okay. And there's my rock and roll daisy from Hello Ladybug. Now, on the card, these are punched out, so it looks a little smaller, but you get the idea, I think. I used, this is Highland Heather and Gorgeous Grape. Here I just did a white. All I did was do the rock and roll on the tips in Highland Heather. And then down here I have the bubble bath and Highland Heather. On the inside, did I do it? I can't remember. Yep, I had an extra, so usually I make a bunch of them and then I have leftovers, so I used it on the inside. And this designer paper is from Bright and Beautiful designer paper, which is probably one of my favorites. That and the other one I'm going to show you, Earth and Elegance, I think it's called. Okay, so that's my first card. Let me close my ink pad up before I lay my card in it. That's my normal trick. So that's my first card. The other thing I could show you, this card, I also did add some speckles. So I used the speckles on the flowers. So this card uses 2 of the 3 tips today, the speckles and the rock and roll. The rock and roll I used on every card. The next card is made with earthen textures. So here I used the slotted faux bow, and I used our little satin ribbon, the gold with very vanilla sheer ribbon on there. Ran it the other way across my piece here. And then this branch, the one that kind of looks like pine branches, I used Pretty Peacock and copper clay. I rocked it. I stamped it first in Pretty Peacock, and I rocked it in earthen clay. And so that has the rock and roll and the faux bow. This is Earthen Textures stamp set and dies. And then on the inside, it doesn't show up nearly as good on here, but this finer one was done the same way. It was stamped first in Pretty Peacock, and then the tips were touched with copper clay. So that is card number 2. And the last card, I used all 3 of the techniques. This is made with the Cheerful Daisies, and I used the large daisies. So all of these daisies, I just left white, and then I rocked and rolled in the color, and then die cut them. So, and you can also see that the background has speckles. So if I put it this way, the background has some speckles, and I speckled the flowers. And then this has the other type of faux bow that's in that same ribbon as I showed you, only it's the lemon lolly instead of the azure afternoon, and I used the same silver cord. So that is that card. The background here, if you're wondering, is just a watercolor wash. I just used my aqua painter picked up a little Lost Lagoon. This is Lost Lagoon, one of the returning colors. So hopefully you can see that. You can see the speckles on the flowers and down there. So that one has all 3. So those are my 3 cards for today. Hope you like that. I'm going to flip my camera back. Those are very quick and easy tips. We're going to call them tips, not techniques. And I hope you liked that. And if you did, please hit like. And Kathy and I would love to have you subscribe to our channels. Like I said, I appreciate so much all of you that have subscribed in the last week or so. It's been great. So that concludes my thing for today. Kathy will be back next week with something great, as always. You always love her cards, and so do I. So have a great day, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.